From training to performing, join our big league conversation. Welcome to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast with your host, Eric Cressey.
Welcome back to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Cressey, and this is episode 68. We've got an awesome guest, one of the best mental skills coaches on the planet right now, someone who blew my mind on one of our staff calls, and after we did it, I absolutely had to get him. He's got a great book out that I just finished up with some excellent insights. So there's lots of good stuff out there for players, coaches, and parents alike, something that can really help you on the mental aspect of the game. I should note that the language on this episode is less PG than it typically is on this podcast. I opted not to edit it out because I do think it's something that he uses to make his points even more compelling. But just a heads up that there will be some swears in here, so please plan accordingly. I think you're really going to like the show regardless. This episode is brought to you by Athletic Greens. It's an all-in-one superfood supplement with 75 whole food sourced ingredients to support your body's nutritional needs across 5 critical areas: energy, immunity, gut health, hormonal support, and healthy aging. I'm an avid user of Athletic Greens myself, in spite of the fact that I tend to be a supplement minimalist. To me, this is a product that is much more like whole food nutritional insurance as opposed to a true supplement. The ingredients have been carefully selected at the highest quality, most natural source. You get essential vitamins and minerals, digestive enzymes, prebiotics, probiotics, and that's the zero compromise approach from the company. It's plant-based, sourced from whole foods at the highest quality, so you won't find harmful chemicals, artificial colors or flavors, preservatives, or added sugar. Really, it's perfect for folks who are gluten and dairy-free, paleo, keto, vegan-friendly, great for people who are intermittent fasting, all that fun stuff. Personally, I love it for obviously our athletes who don't get enough nutritional benefits from fruits and vegetables because they don't eat enough. So it's a way to kind of plug in holes in diets. But also, I really like it for our college and professional athletes who may have complex travel schedules where quality food options aren't always at hand. On a personal level, I'm a husband, father of 3, and an entrepreneur. We split our time between 2 states, and I'm also still an avid lifter. So life is inherently crazy, and it can be stressful, and sleep deprivation is definitely something that we encounter. So I rely on Athletic Greens for part of my immune support, and believe firmly that it's made a big difference in keeping me healthy in spite of how crazy our lifestyle is. They've got a great offer in place. If you head to athleticgreens.com/Cressey, they'll get you 20 free travel packets with your purchase. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/Cressey, CRESSEY, and you can claim your special offer. Today's guest is a renowned mental conditioning expert and strategic advisor to some of the world's most elite performers. He's well known for being the mental coach to Seattle Seahawks quarterback Russell Wilson and has worked closely with prestigious NCAA football programs and coaches, including Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, and Jimbo Fisher. He's been part of 8 national championship games. Additionally, he continues to support the U.S. Special Operations Community, MLB, the NBA, UFC, and many other elite professionals. In 2017, he was named the Sports World's Best Brain Trainer by Sports Illustrated. He recently partnered with Russell Wilson to form Limitless Minds, a company whose mission is to provide both optimum performance and enriched culture within some of the world's top organizations and elite performers. Prior to starting his own mental conditioning company, he had leadership roles at both IMG and Athletes Performance, now Exos. He was raised in Washington State and is the son of the world-renowned peak performance educator, the late Bob Moawad. Bob was an original contributor to the Chicken Soup for the Soul and is the former president of the National Association for Self-Esteem. He was a 2-sport athlete at Occidental College, where he received both his bachelor's degree in politics and his master's degree in education. Please welcome to the show, Trevor Moawad. Welcome to the show, Trevor.
Eric, it's a pleasure to be joining you from Lake Arrowhead, and I know you're in New York, so pretty cool the way technology works.
Yeah, I was going to say we've a lot more of this technology from afar in today's world, unfortunately. So hopefully we'll have a chance to get people back together in the same room here sooner than later.
Yes.
But what was nice about this all came about because you came on a call. It was set up by a mutual friend, Chad. Chad's a rock star with us, and we did a staff call, and you blew not just me, but our entire staff away. And I got off the call. I'm like, I got to get him on the podcast.
Yeah.
And the message that resounded with me the most was, you made a comment about unconditional positivity being a terrible strategy, and it really rang true with me, as it's really in stark contrast with a lot of what we've been fed over the years, and probably one of the reasons why some people still don't buy in on, mental skills coaches and things like that. So talk to me a little about where your perspective on, unconditional positivity not necessarily being a great option began, how it's unfolded in your work with athletes. So maybe start by what's wrong with positive thinking.
Well, having a good understanding of just human performance in general, I think truthfully the bar for sports psychology, mental conditioning is really low. And I don't think that's because, you can't get, capable people involved. I just think that the nature of the industry, not to go inside baseball here, but, it just hasn't been explored. It hasn't been utilized. It hasn't really been, codified in a way that makes it clear to the consumer, what he or she or the organization, sports business, military is looking for. And, you can go to the best college, to study sports psychology, but if the professors, never worked with any teams or organizations or athletes, what can they teach you? Mm-hmm. And so I think that the bar has been low for a really long time. I think in the business world, probably, 60s, 70s, 80s, there's, we found some maturity in it. And then obviously you have, Jack Stark and different guys, and females, Colleen Hacker, who found a way in U.S. women's soccer or Nebraska football. But I think in general, it's just an industry that is just pretty shitty, and not because of, the intent. It's just because nobody's really, figured out, what works. And the idea of unconditional positivity, I just think for whatever reason, what's found its hold in the industry is meditation, breathing, mindfulness, and always going to the default state of being positive, and being raised by a father who was, very successful in the business world, but also worked with UCLA basketball, UNLV basketball, a lot of the Seattle Supersonics, a lot of great organizations, in addition to Boeing, NASA, Starbucks, IBM, Coca-Cola, and really found a system. I just think that when being a part of it, growing up in it, being aware of it, when you're told constantly to go to a place that doesn't feel natural or organic, or you can't get to in the speed you're being asked to, I think it's really made the industry, fuck, man, for lack of a better word, just, no landing place. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Was that something you had to almost correct to? Like, you had obviously been around the positivity message like earlier in your life. Was it a hard thing to come to the realization that maybe that wasn't the best play, or was it something that came seemingly flawlessly or naturally to you?
Well, I think I have incredible empathy. I know a couple of years, last year when I got in front of, major league organization I was going to spend 40 days with, I know when the GM introduces me that everybody is sitting there saying, when's this guy going to shut the fuck up? Like, I know that, and I don't take it personally, because that's more of a statement of where the industry is and less of a statement about me. Mm-hmm. For me, I know, I got 8 years at Alabama, 10 years at Florida State, 9 years U.S. Army Special Operation Command Consulting, 12 years at IMG, 2 years at Exos. I found a way to survive, mm-hmm. So, and I know I'm going to absorb, some of those things. But I think for me, Eric, I think it's a great question. I started with a lot of the traditional elements, affirmation, cybernetics, waves, listened to every Zig Ziglar, Brian mm-hmm. Tracy, Maxwell Maltz tapes from 4 years old on. And my family played them for me when I went to bed, as well as my dad's audio tapes, Your Nature's Greatest Miracle, Unlocking Your Potential, Committed to Quality, because my dad traveled 200 days a year. So instead of missing him, my mom played all his tapes. Mm-hmm. So I had this unique education, and I really understood that negativity was not a place I wanted to spend time. I wasn't allowed to watch the news growing up, no country music. We really tried to isolate the negativity within our household. Wasn't weirdo. It wasn't like anything super weird. But it was just, the limitation of negativity. But being positive after bad games, being positive after getting dumped, being positive, in all sorts of different situations was a real challenge for me, until I got sick. I got sick my sophomore year of college, dropped out of school. And then all of a sudden, man, this idea of negative, positive, my mind influencing me, like it was very real. And with sicknesses, you're no sicker the day after diagnosis than you are the day before, but your mind starts running with you, man. And that's what it took for me, 19 years being around one of the best teachers in the industry. And it wasn't until I was sick and had to drop out of college that I really gave credence to my mind and the relationship that I could build if I partnered with it. And it wasn't about necessarily positive or negative, but I think the vast majority of people think they're fucked. Like my mind is what it is. I'm a pinball in my life, and they've tried being positive. They've tried meditating. They've tried breathing, and it's too hard. So, they go back to, let's just see how it works. And I was no different. Once I got sick, I became a lot different. I realized because of the way I was raised, I was equipped to handle it. I was able to get back to school. I took a year off of sports, finishing strong. And I've been well developed to handle adversity as well as manage success because of how I was raised. But it didn't happen easily for me. So I give great empathy for, like a major league pitcher who's like, when's this dude going to shut his fucking mouth? and I understand that. I don't take that personally.
So I'm curious. You even hinted at it a little bit, and I remember on our initial call, you dropped a statistic about how watching the TV news, I think it was in the morning, negatively impacted in the people in the day that followed. What was the statistic? I can't remember off the top of my head.
Well, I think, look, ultimately the question was, as I started to expand and advance, and I have 19 years of signing 1-year contracts, whether it's the Jaguars, the Dolphins, I had, like Coach Saban wanted a message for everybody, not the 1% of 1%, look, you like Adam Grant. I think he's got a great message. It's not for everybody. And he's really, really fucking smart. I'm not. And so, but what I am is I've seen a lot, and I've seen a lot of the things that work. And, a giver and a taker, won't resonate at Alabama. It just doesn't. So, I think when we started thinking of the message, like, okay, if you have a couple hours a week or an hour a week or 30 minutes a week to deliver something around the mind, and it's got to be for all 85 guys, what makes sense? And what we found out unequivocally was that negativity worked negatively, somewhere between 83 and 100% of the time, from the Mayo Clinic, Harvard, Georgetown. There's nobody that can deny that. And that all the information around being positive or meditating or being mindful or all those things was anecdotal, particularly positive thinking. And so as we started to study that, and Coach Saban really kind of commissioned me to do more, I found out that negativity is carried most powerfully by language, not inner thoughts, but outer language. And when you say something out loud, good or bad, it's 10 times more powerful than when you think it. And if it's negative, it's a multiple of 4 to 7 times more powerful. So when I say negative things out loud, I increase their probability by 40 to 70 times that they'll happen. Doesn't mean they'll happen, but I'm increasing their probability. So my externalization becomes very powerful. Secondarily, to go back to your original question, when I consume negativity, 3 minutes of cable news before 9 a.m. increases your probability by 27% that after 8 o'clock, you'll say you had a shitty day. 3 minutes of cable news. And
It's especially timely in light of today's events, right?
well, and especially timely. So country music, the consumption of negativity, our conversations, what we're watching, what we're listening to, what we're saying, all of those things aren't hard to change. They're just discipline, their behaviors. Now, where I think the industry, in my opinion, Eric, has failed is it starts with baseball players. It starts with football players. It starts with business people. It starts with military operators at trying to regulate breathing, trying to be positive, trying to change your inner thoughts, which is absolutely the hardest thing to do. It's not as powerful, and it's nowhere near in your control. Now, if you master the fundamentals of thinking and the basics, and then you add, the ability to meditate, regulate your breathing, eidetic imagery, visualization, affirmations, kind of like organic chemistry, well, then you've earned the right to do that. And there's athletes that, by our second year, we're doing that. But I was with Fred Taylor, the running back, for 9 years. We never ever got to any of that. And he's going to be a Hall of Famer, just by coming in the building at 6:30 in the morning and doing an ice bath at the end of the day and staying on top of good behavior.
You made a comment. So the book, it's called It Takes What It Takes, and it was outstanding. To be honest, I bought the audiobook while we were still on the call because your message was resounding, and it lived up to it. And my favorite quote in the book, you said, the first step from negative to neutral is elimination. The last thing was compelling. You talked about it with respect to, even using the example of people cleaning up their diet. Like the first thing is get the crappy food out of the house, right? Let's start with elimination, because we know that's a negative outcome that's waiting to happen. So let's cover some examples, and you even hinted at a few of how can athletes apply this, right? If we're talking about a 16-year-old baseball player or, a major leaguer that's listening to this call, what are the first places what are the low-hanging fruits with respect to eliminating negativity from their world?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I think exactly why we wrote the book, to try to affect, a broader audience. I think the first thing is what you say out loud. And if I'm a baseball player and I say, well, when I strike out or I'm 0 for 3 and I come in and I take my bat and I fucking hit a bunch of stuff, I start throwing it, I yell, isn't it okay if I vent? There's no science that says venting's good for you. So by externalizing what you don't want to have happen, what's currently happening, how pissed off you are, you're following the statistics of increasing the probability that the rest of the game will go that way by 40 to 70 times. You could still do it, and you could still end up turning it around, but now you're not only competing against, a 16-year-old pitcher at perfect game, but, you're competing against your own stupid language, that's not helping you. So the first thing is if you believe the data, which is very clear, that saying negative things out loud predicts and perpetuates your next set of behaviors, then the first step is stop saying stupid shit out loud. And I'm not telling you to say positive things. So the idea is the process of elimination gets you closer to where you want to be, as opposed to trying to add things while you're still doing the wrong things. So, if I eat a bag of Doritos, then I eat another one. Eating 2 apples isn't the answer. Eating only half of the second bag is the starting point.
I love that. So in the book, the title is It Takes What It Takes, and with good reason. It's a theme that's reiterated throughout. And in one portion, you commented on how you, as an athlete, you don't really have that many choices because it takes what it takes. And obviously, like Russell Wilson is the example you probably use the most, and you talk about the great lengths that he's gone to basically make sure success happens for him, right? He makes crazy dedication, and he does what it takes. How do we reconcile this with knowing that a lot of athletes give even better effort when we as coaches give them input on the process? So in other words, I think the assumption is there aren't that many choices, but at the same time, we want to get them involved. Are those hard things to reconcile, to give them an ownership role in the process instead of just saying these are the mandates that you have to follow?
Well, first of all, I mean, I think you and I both know that there's no have tos.
Yeah.
No, and becoming a player, is, I mean, really it's, look, I believe average people become average through average behavior, and it literally is, all right, man, if look, the average married couple in 2016 communicated 27 minutes a week directly. You're not going to have a good marriage talking 27 minutes a week. Mm-hmm. So if having a good marriage is important to me, then I've got to decide if I want to do the things that you do to make a marriage good. Not just falling in love and being passionate, but making time to spend together from 6 a.m. to 6:30 like Coach Saban does, where they watch the weather and eat Little Debbie's. And that 30 minutes aggregates to 210 minutes over the course of a week, which is a big deal. So, first of all, I think, Eric, we have to understand influence. Who has it? Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, the science of influence, as we've studied it, is my influence. What I tell myself and what I say to myself is 10 times more powerful than what my coach says to me or my parent says to me. So do they have influence? Of course they do. Like a commercial can make you buy tennis shoes. Mm-hmm. Okay. But, your desire to buy the tennis shoes while you want them is a lot more important than maybe the suggestion of buying them. So how much can you really influence a player? If a player, you're with the New York Yankees now. If you take a look at Aaron Judge, in the family he was raised in, there's only so much they can do for him. 90% of the power is going to be him. 10% is going to be with the family. That's why you see so many people who had every break and don't make it, and guys sitting in a room that had none of the breaks and they make it. Mm-hmm. So first of all, if I'm an individual athlete, I'm going to be more influential than anybody else. However, a coach to me is like a digital speed limit sign on top of the speed limit. You give them the speed limit. If you want to do this, this is the framework. Objectively, I didn't make it up. This is what it is. And I can give you suggestions on how to stay on course. Hey, you're going 70. You need to be going 75. Or, hey, you're going 90. You need to be going 65. But at the end of the day, you're going to make that decision for yourself. I think where we can really help is by providing for them what good looks like, and trying to show them what good looks like is much more powerful than telling them what not to do, because the negativity being 70 times more powerful is going to take them down the bad road, as opposed to this is the better road. And if you're not doing that now, just do one more thing right and aggregate the marginal gains.
Absolutely.
And so you do have influence as a coach. You do have influence as a parent. I was a high school teacher for 4 years. You do have influence. And I think your influence is showing them what good looks like, helping hold them accountable. If they're in your program, these are our guidelines, but also respect their right to be dumbasses and go down the road they go. And I think less emotion and more like, hey, this is what it takes. I'm sorry you're not doing that.
So one question I did have for you was, we talked about like the best step from negative to neutral is elimination. And we also talked about just this, this perception of, don't talk about it, right? Keep the negative thoughts from becoming words. I'm curious, what do you do when you have a coach, right? So there are going to be young athletes that are listening to this who didn't get to pick their coach, right? And they have, the Debbie Downer coach that's always, in their ear and feeding negativity. And we've all had those people. What's the approach for somebody to handle that if it's a circumstance they can't necessarily control who is their coach?
Right. I've worked for some really tough coaches and some intense coaches. And this is what I would say, like, learning how to become a neutral thinker, like, you just can't not be negative. You have to be something, is the idea that, is taking the judgment out. Like, where positive thinking fails people is it requires too quick for people to change states. It's almost like you're going backwards and requires you automatically to go forwards. Mm-hmm. You know, you've played 7 bad games in a row. You're moved down from major leagues to AAA to AA. And that's real. So positive's like, hey, let that go. Just start getting your mind back on what it was like. No, like neutral's like, hey, I'm not where I want to be. I get it. Or I am where I want to be. I get it. What's the truth? Okay. And I accept it. Okay. But where people who are negative and call themselves realists is they stay in that negative truth and they predict and do the same things they were doing. So their future looks exactly like their present and their past. What neutral says is, while it is real, what I do is going to change my future, not how I feel or what happened. And it's like a car going back and just stopping first and saying, all right, what's happening right now? I've got 4 interceptions. I'm failing 2 classes. I just lost 2 relationships in a row. Like, what's the truth? Take the judgment out. And then what can I do, you know, to make the next step different and focus on behavior, not outcomes. Because if I'm down 25 points or I'm in AA, focusing on the major leagues isn't the right step. Focusing on the next at bat, the next batting practice, the next conversation, you know, is the way I think to deal with that. So I think ultimately, this idea, going to the next part is when we're coached or we're parented, or we're taught by people who behave a certain way, the best thing is to go to the truth about those people as well. Hey man, this guy's an asshole. And that's what it is. You know, I had one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL who had 2 years playing poorly, and he played for a real hard coach. And we had a long conversation, and he was telling me, you know, this guy does this, and he doesn't like me, and he doesn't. And, you know, so I went back and I found a series of 7 different press conferences where all the things he was saying about this player, he was saying about 7 other players on his team. And he said, I had no idea he talked about them the way he talks about me. I said, because it's not about you. That's who he is. That's how he coaches. That's how he teaches. And you're being emotional where it's okay to give emotion, but not be emotional. And you need to accept who this guy is. This is where you're at. You're not getting traded, and put your mind. You can only think about one thing at a time. It's called the law of substitution. Get your mind focusing on your next at bat, your next play, and accept him or her for who they are. And you don't have the ability to change them. Talking about him's not helping you. Take the judgment out. This is the hand I'm dealt. I can make it work.
And one of the guys that you talked about in the book was a guy who clearly made it work for a long time. So Vince Carter actually just retired after 22 years in the NBA, and you had an opportunity to work with him, and I think it's a great time to dig in on it. Like 22 years is a big deal in any sport, but particularly the NBA, right? There's not that kind of lifespan, you know, for guys, you know, nowadays. So what did you see in him that contributed to that longevity? What were the sacrifices he made to play that long?
Well, you know, I got to spend 1 season with the Memphis Grizzlies. Chris Wallace, the GM at the time, was a big Alabama football fan, loved Saban, kind of wanted to see if you could integrate some of the psychological things we were doing there in basketball. Yeah, I still don't know in basketball. You know, it's a different sport. But, you know, I got to spend probably 30, 35 days with that organization and got to spend, you know, a good amount of time with a lot of the players and build good relationships. I had met Vince before. He'd been down to IMG, you know, just a good dude and a big college football fan. And the guys knew that was really the world that I'd come from, even though I was a college basketball player. And so we had a lot of just conversations about a variety of things. And, you know, I got the guys tickets for like Alabama, Ole Miss and sideline and all that stuff. And Mike Conley as well. I knew Mike Conley's dad, the triple jumper, who was also Darren McFadden's agent. And so, you know, just in in having a conversation with Vince, just like having a conversation with Michael Johnson or having a conversation with, somebody like Chris Ferris, a Command Sergeant Major, U.S. Army Special Operation Command, you could tell, man, like right when you meet him, like whatever that guy did or whatever that woman would do, they're going to be successful. Vince was one of those people. And we had a situation at one of the schools I worked at where 3 players were arrested in 8 hours. And I was getting ready to drive over there, and I just pre-scheduled a trip on that Sunday, Monday, and we had a conversation. And he's like, man, how many of those guys want to play pro ball? I said, probably truthfully 6 or 7 out of 10. He said, isn't it crazy that they think that they can behave any way they want, regardless of their aptitude, and still play professional football? And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, I gave up, doing what I wanted to do years ago. And I said, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, like if I dunk in a game, I can't get back as fast at 38 years old. So, I'm strategic about when I dunk, what time I go to bed. I don't eat fast food, hyperbaric chambers. I lift the days of games. My choices are made for me because I'm trying to play at 38. So I said, well, like choice is an illusion? He said, yeah. And he said, because it takes what it takes. You either do it or you don't. I want to continue to play. Fortunately, I have the ability. I could do all these things and not make it, but I have the talent combined with the behavior to still play at 38 years old. If I went away from that, which there'd be nothing wrong with that, I just wouldn't be able to play at 38. And so, when I went and talked to our team, it was a big thing we talked about, like, look, don't make this about your coach. Don't make this about your mom. Don't make this about the league. Like, these rules are predetermined. And so they're objective, which means you do them or you don't. And if you're Tiger Woods and you don't do the things that great golfers do, you're not going to be a great golfer. And if you're Tiger Woods with your aptitude and do those things, you're going to be legendary. Russell Wilson is a great example because he's, 5'9", and he's an aggregation of such great behavior. Plus he obviously has good good anthropometrics, big hands, some other elements, but there were not 5'9" quarterbacks, playing in his league outside of Breeze, and Russell and Breeze were 11 years apart. Mm-hmm. And so I think the more you stop competing with your choices, Eric, and then just look at it. And I think it relates to this health thing. I think to the degree that you can control your environment, wear your mask, social distance, do the things that we know are true, you're going to have a better chance of being healthy. And if you don't, you're rolling the dice. And I think a lot of people with their career, I'm going to go to bed at 4 a.m. There's nothing wrong with going to bed at 4 a.m. if you can compete to the standard once you walk in the building at 8.
That's a great point. And, I'm actually curious. In the book, you talked about the Supersize Me Experiment you ran. It was obviously not the same type, but it was something in that same vein. Tell us about it and how it unfolded. I thought that was fascinating, that chapter.
Yeah, I was going through I've developed a lot of really good relationships with just friends in the special operations community. 2 or 3 of them are in sort of that best friend group of mine. And I love learning from them. They love learning from us. I go spend time with them. They come spend time with us. And I have some of the dissociative disconnection issues that probably aren't great. Mm-hmm. They allow me to compartmentalize and do what I do, but they also, costed me a marriage, not from behavior, but from disconnection. And, I was going through the divorce. I was going through probably 3 or 4 significant challenges. And I had a conversation with one of my buddies who was a breacher. We were in San Francisco, going to an event that Ryan Neese was running, in the venture capital space. And, I was just kind of downloading on everything that was going on. And this was the first time we had a chance to catch up. And then we were kind of talking about the fundamentals of thinking. Is it the externalization of negativity versus, stopping doing that versus, the consumption of negativity? And he said, well, why don't you try while you're going through the biggest challenge in your life to consume negativity at a high level, almost like a hostage experience, and see if your language, by not saying negative things out loud, and other elements, can combat your consumption of negativity. So it was myself using, at a difficult time, myself as a lab rat, believing that, I could outmaneuver the consumption of negativity by managing my language, and I did like 4 hours a day of, a news station I hated, Megadeth, Anthrax, new country music, all these things. And the goal is to do it for 31 days and then just live my life. And, by the 20th day, I was, had all sorts of, psychosomatic, psychogenic characteristics of depression. I could only see backwards. We charted, all the music I listened to on, Pandora, as well as we used my text messages as sort of the basis, to evaluate, my mood changes.
So we have a lot of parents and coaches who listen to this podcast so that they can, help their kids and those that they coach. And there's an old Converse line, I think it was, that said, "Champions aren't born, they're made." You reflected that champions might actually be born and then unmade. We even hinted at this a little bit when you talked about the 90-10, but what are the common pitfalls our society is making with kids, and particularly in the athletic arena? And I'm actually really intrigued about it. I know you have experience with high-level tennis, and I mean, in the tennis world, like, the crazy parents are on another level. They blow baseball, football, basketball out of the water combined. Where do you think, parents are making mistakes with managing young athletes?
Well, I think mistakes is the wrong way to look at it. Mm-hmm. I had incredible empathy, and I was interviewed multiple times when Lori Loughlin, and I had some good friends at UCLA that lost their jobs, with, the parents buying the scholarships or buying preferential treatment into different schools. Obviously at IMG Academy, I was there for 12 years. I think it's almost $75,000 a year now. So it wasn't helicopter parents as much as commando Apache, super helicopter parents. And I think the truth for many families is the success of your son or daughter, really reflects, socially on who you are. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a reality. And I don't think it's true. But I think that for many parents, the better their son or daughter does is a reflection of their chromosomes. And when you just look at the science of influence, it's just not that way. Their success, you had nowhere near as much connection as you think you did. And if they fail, you had nowhere as much blame as you think you did. I mean, my influence over my dad's is 10-1. Like, that's it. Now I can beat kids up. I can yell at them. I can take away the joy, and I can do things to really contribute to that. Or I can, be hyper supportive and make them feel, like, the more success they have as a baseball player, the more I love them. And then, I've developed a conditional relationship as opposed to an unconditional relationship. And, have I seen a lot of dumb, asshole dickhead parents? Of course I have, but I've seen tons of kids, Eric, truthfully, overcome them. Mm-hmm. And I've seen some of the most incredible, nurturing, supportive, unconditional parents, that have done everything. And I've seen, the kids, rebel and go the opposite direction as well. What I would say is parents have to understand the science of influence. And I have so many times parents would say, John isn't motivated to play baseball, and motivation is motive and action. It's, what I want combined with the action that's going to get me there. And, I said, well, what does John want to do? Just wants to play Halo. And then, he is motivated. Really? To play Halo, right? So much of it comes with the person's values, what's important to them, lining up with their goals. And one of the things that we would do early on, and my dad did with me at a really young age, is, what are the things that you want? Like, what do you want? And then it was like, okay. And then he said, and then what do you value? I value success. I value hard work. I value God. I value family. I value, fulfillment. And then if my goals are, getting a college scholarship, developing a great relationship with a girlfriend, doing well academically, if my values and my goals line up, I'm, on the path to being successful. So we would do these exercises when I was young with really understanding what my values were. And I think that was, mission critical, because if my goals lined up with my values, then all I had to do was get behaviors action steps that were going to get me there. The problem, I think, with a lot of kids is their values, like if you say, well, what are your goals? I want a college scholarship. I want to play perfect game. I want to get drafted. I want to make money. Okay. Well, what do you value? Free time, success, like things that don't line up with those goals.
Yep.
So either your values have to change or your goals have to change. I think the best thing we can do, as parents, as, coaches, as educators, is help them understand, how to develop values, and then the upside of having those values, but also respecting the fact that generationally they're growing up with different values. And so, you can't want it enough for them. My dad was tough on me. My dad was a high school coach and, was very successful in business, came back my last 2 years, worked out the schedule with my high school coach, because my dad was the state championship coach, and literally coached me the last 2 years. So I played for my dad, I know those expectations, but I loved basketball. I wanted to be good for myself. And, I wanted to play college basketball for me. I knew I could play college soccer at a small school, but I knew college basketball, was going to be a real reach. And I wanted to do well academically for me, but there were other things that they wanted that I didn't want. So, that's kind of a long way but if your values and your goals and your behavior don't line up, then you got to change one or two of those things. And we move towards the things we hold uppermost in our mind. And that's why the process of elimination is so powerful. If you can help kids understand that maybe one of the things that they're currently doing isn't good for them or not going to get them really where they want to go, then by getting rid of that, they're one step closer to having a better understanding of what they might want, as opposed to telling them what they should want while they're still doing all the wrong things.
That's what I was just going to say, is maybe the best path to good parenting is to just make it harder to be negative. Whether we're talking about the nutrition example where it's like, hey, you don't buy the foods that make a kid want to eat junk food. You make it harder. I think that was kind of a Chip and Dan Heath line, was you're not necessarily going to change the person, but you can change the situation. So there's something to be said for setting them up for avoiding negativity before.
And I think, Eric, and I think, if they get in the car and they're complaining, or if a lot of it's the issue of the kid, don't give their pain a voice. Just, hey, look, I understand. When I was playing college basketball, I'd call my dad back and say, God, Coach Newhall is killing me today. Every time I got the ball up, I was looking at, and my dad would say, Trev, you want to play college basketball? He's tough. And we'd have a conversation about it, as opposed to him judging me, are you making a good entry pass? Are you bouncing it? Yeah. And this and that. No, I wasn't doing that. And then we're kind of going to a neutral place, but I just, coming from, being first generation money, I grew up at a great private school, great private college. I belong to a country club. Like, I get the whole pressure with parents. And then I also get the other side of the families that, don't have anything and they're really leaning on that son or daughter to make it. I've seen tons of those stories as well. And, going all the way back to Freddie Adu, and so, can you help them aggregate behaviors, and can you praise, process, as opposed to, outcomes. I think that's where, hey, look, from my perspective, I liked how you played. I know it may not show up on the stat sheet, but I liked how you played. Or, hey, you know what? I know you scored 17, but I felt like defensively, if they want that conversation, if you start having those conversations with your kids, I mean, there's only so many things they're going to listen to you about. Mm-hmm. And if you try to be a master of everything, then, and you're not helping them understand that you love them unconditionally, you're going down a really slim slope. And that's, more from what I saw at 12 years, and that's also seeing, like, some of the best athletes in the world, like Yvonne Lendl and Peter Korda, parent their kids, in addition to somebody that's going to spend $400,000 to get their kid a book scholarship for soccer to Duke. So, they can tell their friends in Long Island that, Sarah's got a scholarship and playing soccer at Duke. Mm-hmm. Like, that means something. You can say what you want. You can judge those parents. That means something, but it comes many times at the price of the kid.
No doubt about it. And what I really liked about the book is that you speak to your work across multiple sports. Obviously, your relationship with Russell Wilson is, to some degree the foundation of the book, and he wrote the foreword, and it's probably the most compelling example. But what was cool is that it also, there were examples in basketball, there were examples in soccer, tennis, baseball, etc. And I'm curious, have you found that there are principles that are universal across all sport disciplines, like things that carry over to every sport? And then also, are there approaches you've taken in one sport that have great results only to see it really fail miserably in another realm? Is it male, female? Are there things that work in some but not in the other?
The male female is probably where the biggest difference comes, mm-hmm. because I think just when you go back to a lot of what we did at Bolletary, which is we did a lot of non-perspective videotaping where the camera would just follow the athlete for 20, 25 minutes across any sport, and we let them come in and see what a coach sees. And that was really powerful, from the best athletes to everybody. But for women, many times they couldn't get beyond their body image, so they couldn't really follow their actual behavior of what they're doing when they have the ball or when they don't. I think body image, self-image, in my experience, how you communicate, really building a good foundation of respect is probably more powerful in the women's sports than the men's sports. And I think that works in business and in life. But I think the way I've tried to teach, Eric, truthfully, mm-hmm. is really focus on the fundamentals of thinking across all sports. And I don't think they're that much different. I don't really get like, once we've built a baseline, then we get more situational, mm-hmm. Where you can have a conversation, and it can be more this game, this moment, this pitcher, this coach, this NCAA tournament game, this AAU game, this Olympic development game. But until you get there, it's more about your language, putting a plan in place, how your behaviors match up with good performers in your sport, on field, off court, on court, and I think the aggregate of good behaviors is way more similar than dissimilar. And I'm gonna encourage people in your podcast, because I know you're well followed. I was watching this Dazed and Confused, and you got to be over 35 probably to know the movie.
There you go.
But it's Matthew McConaughey, who's still highly relevant, I think, mm-hmm. to this generation. And And, and I'm like that was 25 years ago. And this dude's still here and going strong. And he was making $300 a week back in that movie. Like, how is this guy still here? Because I'd have never guessed at 23 he would. And, he had this really interesting evolution in his career. I tracked down Major Applewhite and some people, because there's not a lot of places where you can find him speaking about his philosophy. He's not somebody out there preaching. And unless you're a Texas athlete, from the University of Texas. And I found a graduation speech, Eric, where he speaks to the University of Houston and, where his grandfather played football. And, at the time, it wasn't Major Applewhite, who's ever at, Texas football now, was coaching and he spoke to the 4,000 students graduating from Houston. And he broke down his philosophy on life into 13 steps. And it sounds no different than Bill Gates, no different than Russell Wilson, no different than Joe Girardi. The best people, he aggregated the same behaviors. He said it all differently, but it was all the same things. And I listened to it like 10 times. It's like 45 minutes on YouTube. And it tells you that success leaves clues across disciplines, and so does failure. And so I think, I've never seen myself, I'm not a sports fan. I watch way more HGTV than ESPN. Obviously I love watching Russ play. I love watching Alabama, Georgia, Michigan State, whatever, Clint Mathis, Freddie Adu, Xavier Malise, Tommy Haas, Serena Williams. All the different athletes. But I've spent just as much time, truth be told, with high school teams. I was a high school coach for 4 years. I take great pride in the under 15 B girls team. I talk about them in the book. I think the big time is where you are. I'm probably more known. Why did I get into college football? That's where the money is. And I got with Nick Saban. And then when coaches would leave his program, they didn't know who else to find. So I was one of a handful of people kind of part of that architecture. I don't even know if it's because I'm good, but because they were familiar. So, but I think that's the point, to me, Eric, is, like just getting a really good framework and a really good understanding for what makes you good at anything. And I think it's going to relate across sports. And my last point is, if you're good enough, you're old enough. Kids don't have to be seniors in high school to do this shit right.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of kids at 11, 12, 13 years old, that they want it. They know what to do. They know they've got physiological limitations, but they're doing things right. So when the physical limitations change, they're ready to rock and roll.
Oh, this is awesome stuff. Trevor, you've got some outstanding stuff online, both Instagram and Twitter. It's Trevor Moawad, TrevorMoawad. Constant stream of good content. You curate some content, you put out your own good stuff too. And then the book, I'm gonna sing your praises. It's outstanding. It's called It Takes What It Takes, How to Think Neutrally and Gain Control of Your Life. I hit it as an audiobook on Audible. It was a great listen on my ride from Florida back to Massachusetts, and honestly banged it out in a matter of a day or two. So
easy read, right?
Yeah, even easier listen, right?
It's an easy listen, 3.5 hours. Eric, it's a huge, obviously your success speaks for itself, not just obviously down on the coast of Florida, but where you're at. Obviously now excited for you and your opportunity with the New York Yankees. Glad Chad connected us. And I think you understand what's going to allow you to be successful in the biggest and best organization in all of sports is doing the things that have allowed you to be successful. And getting more guys. At the end of the day, if you're a coach, you're never going to have a majority a lot of times. It's pluralities. It's just building consensus, respect people's right to be average, and then also, go on the journey with those that are trying to be great. And give them a chance to be successful. And it takes what it takes. is kind of my first foray out of sort of this hidden world of sports and more the broader goal I know for Russell and myself, our business Limitless Minds, is how can we demystify thinking? You know, and fuck sports for making it all about meditating and breathing. You know, like it's so disappointing, and it frustrates me because I'm not a big presence in that world, and I get the value of it, but we need to start with not saying stupid things. We need to start with not watching or hanging out with people that we can avoid. We need to start with not putting ourselves where we're listening to the wrong people and we're giving pain too much of a voice. We need to get that stuff right. And when we get that stuff right, then we can evolve to breathing, and we can evolve to changing from the inside out and meditating and imprinting. All of those things have a place, but let's do simple better first.
No doubt about it. Well, the book is outstanding. The social media is awesome. And folks can find you. It's mowadconsultinggroup.com if they're interested in learning about some of the services you offer. But Trevor, can't thank you enough. So really appreciate you taking the time, and hopefully we'll get to do it again soon.
Eric, best of luck. It's a privilege and a great opportunity. Go Yankees.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd be thrilled if you'd consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving us a review to read on iTunes. We welcome your suggestions for future guests and questions. Just email elitebaseballpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for your continued support, and we'll see you next episode.